there, happy Frightmares. So this week's episode, I'm so sorry I have a crud. I think it's like a summer cold. If my energy seems low, that's what it is. Any cuts that you see or what have you are going to be because I'm having a coughing fit or just a generally really bad time at the moment. So my husband, we have our Patriots mug here. He made me a very hot beverage, so I should be feeling okay, right as rain here in a little bit. Well, at least good enough to maybe get some sleep, which is exactly what I plan on doing as soon as I hit the stop button. Anyway, the case that I originally had planned for this week is taking a little bit longer than expected. It's going to be a few parts, so I'm going to call it a little mini series, and it's definitely one of those that you want to take your time with and make sure that you get your facts right, and whenever you guys see it, you'll know why. So I was racking my brain trying to figure out what I could do to make sure I got you guys a video out this week. That wouldn't take a whole lot of time to research. Normally, it takes a couple of days to research a certain case. And my husband and I were talking, and he said, "You remember a company that we worked for, and it was haunted?" And I said, "Yeah, I do remember that." And so I thought, you know what, that would be a really good episode tonight. So I'm going to share with you guys my little experience that I had with said company. And then I thought that I would go into a couple of more cases since you enjoyed last week's video with the compilation of different, kinds of cases. I thought that I would go into maybe one or two more cases of people that have had paranormal experiences while on the job. Keep in mind, if you guys have ever had anything like that, I would definitely love to hear it. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. Cheers, guys. All right, guys. So imagine you're at a place that is normally very productive during the day, the hustle and bustle of people getting things done. You're chatting away with colleagues and things like that. And then at night, when the lights began to go out and the offices begin to close, things kind of change a little bit and the vibe gets kind of creepy. Maybe it goes down, definitely the energy's lower. Maybe you're working by yourself or you're working with one other person, but things, they're just slower at night. This kind of happened to me when I was working on our National Guard base here called Camp Minden. You have some companies that can't operate outside of facilities like that. And we had, what, honey, probably about 3 or 4 companies there on Camp Minden.
Yeah, about 4.
Yeah, about 4. And they made different kinds of things. We had one that did night vision goggles for the military. We had one that was a black powder plant that kind of did things like fireworks and that sort of thing. We have one that would take government ordinances and recycle them and then sell them to companies like the one that I worked for, where we mainly made products for mining, very large scale products. I don't know if I want to say the word. Basically, it was a lot of boom boom chemicals and powders and that kind of thing, and you would pour them up like pancake batter into tubes or into containers. I'm not going to give away all that, that's neither here nor there, but you would finish them. We would ship them off to different mining companies in Utah, or there was a diamond mine in Canada that we would ship them to, and they would use them to get their raw materials. So back in the day, what happened was the state of Louisiana originally came in. There was a small town there. They bought out the town and they moved it several miles over. They enclosed the town and they turned it into the National Army base, Camp Minden. Tucked in here and there, it is the strangest thing. You'll be driving down the road through our storage facilities. We call them magazines. And you would see a cemetery on this National Guard base just kind of tucked off on a side road. Or you would see signs that would say, Fuller Cemetery Road, and they were just smaller family cemeteries, but they were all over. And the atmosphere of the base was kind of creepy in the first place, even during the day. There were a lot of swampy areas and things like that. And so at night, it was just worse. And what they used Camp Minden for in the beginning was an ammunitions plant. They would make government ammunition for the army, the military. And there was an accident back in the day, and I believe there were 3 people injured. And, well, not injured, they were actually killed in explosions out there. And I don't know how many injured, but it was a big deal. And several years ago, maybe 20 years ago, maybe longer than that, the plant actually closed down, and then companies could rent spaces like ours and come in and make things. So now you have a little bit of the background. The site where our company was located just happened to be ground zero of the accident. You could still see pieces of wall and buildings that you could tell they were almost kind of ripped apart, and foundations that didn't have anything over them. And there were several buildings out there, and there was one that we called the Sugar Shack, because what we processed in there was this white powdery substance, and that's why we called it the Sugar Shack. And they had these really old lockers in there. And I mean old. These were back from the ammo plant days. And there were a couple of them that you could still use, but the majority of them were kind of rusted shut, and they were really hard to open anyway. There were 3 people at a time, depending on if we were running another piece of equipment, but generally 2. And we ran 3 shifts, and we ran a night shift that was 10 to 6, I believe. And there was kind of, tales that weird things happened, especially in this building. You could hear doors open. You could hear movement, somebody moving around when there was nobody in there but you and your coworker. You could hear whispering, but you never could make out what it was saying. And you would hear the lockers opening and closing, or the latches going up on the lockers. Now, keep in mind, they were like the old school gray metal ones. I was working in there one night. I can't remember why that was, because I normally didn't. But anyway, I was down there. And I wasn't thinking about the building being haunted or anything. That was the furthest thing from my mind. But I did start hearing, you could hear footsteps. And the thing about that was, due to one piece of machinery, there was an area of the floor that would constantly be wet. But you could hear that. You could hear like the footsteps in the puddle. And still, I didn't think anything of it. I never saw the lockers open and close. On this particular night, I heard the lockers open and close. You would hear them unlatch, you would hear them squeak open, and then you could hear them slam shut. I couldn't see them because there was a half wall there, but I definitely heard them, and it was really freaky. The 2 ladies that normally worked in that building, they were used to it. They were some tough women, and they just went on ahead and did their work and paid it no mind at all. So that was kind of freaky. Another thing that happened at this particular plant that I absolutely witnessed with my own 2 eyes. When I started there in the beginning, I was a paper shuffler. I worked in the office there, and I was responsible for, the typical things secretaries are: filing, shipping, in and out, invoices, that kind of thing. And so I had a corner office, and it was right beside a kitchen. There was a lot of glass in there. You could see into a very long front hallway, but the offices were very centralized, and it was almost like a little hub. You walked out of one door, and then, there were the offices there with this little kitchenette thing off to the side. The long hallway led from a front door, and then our chemist's offices and our maintenance offices were down one hall. If you continued straight, you would go to the mail locker rooms and the storage room. I would see at first out of the corner of my eye movement, and then you could look and you would just absolutely see it like it was a normal person, plain as day, 100% a human being, and it was this little old man. And he went everywhere. You could see him everywhere throughout the plant, but I mainly saw him in that office area. And when I would see him, it would just be him walking by the open doors towards the mail locker room facility. I still remember him. He was a slight man. You could see the wrinkles in his face. He had a shock of white hair. His skin color was fleshy toned, healthy looking. I never got a creepy feeling from him until afterwards, when you realize what it was that you saw. That was kind of freaky. But he never bothered anybody. There was never a sense of dread or anything. He never moved anything, as far as I know. He wasn't a mischief maker. It was just a little man that was going about his business every day, and you would just sometimes see him doing it and sometimes not. And one of the odd things was, when you came onto the plant, you would change out of your street clothes and you would change into these white Tyvek style jumpsuits, and you would put on your work boots because we had to have special things with the things that we were working with. But this man, I can't remember. It was odd because I would see him wearing like a plaid shirt, almost like a plaid khaki colored shirt. But then oftentimes I would see him in either a blue, like a navy blue coverall style, real dark navy blue. And we really didn't have anybody that wore that particular style of jumpsuit there. Now, I do believe, honey, did our truckers wear blue?
Yeah, the truckers wore blue.
Okay, yeah, our truckers wore dark blue suits, but it wasn't the same style. So, that was one other thing that I thought was odd. And those are my experiences. So they weren't terribly bad. And that was the only place. I did have one other experience in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but that wasn't my workplace. We'll get into that in another episode. But there are two more cases that I would like to tell you, and we will be getting into those in just one moment. Okay, y'all. So our first case takes place in the early 2000s. It happened to a gentleman that went by the name of Ronnie, and he was 21 years old when this first happened. He had taken a job at a group home as a support worker for adults with developmental needs. He'd been working there for about 4 months. He worked the weekend shift, which was Friday to Sunday, and his hours were 11 to 7. So he'd come in on Friday. He had developed a routine, and his responsibilities just included, perimeter checks. If any of the residents needed anything, that's what he was there for. Things like that. He would do a little bit of paperwork, but other than that, it was relatively quiet. He actually had the luxury of sleeping there if he chose. There was a little cot bed in the room in the office, and so that's what he did. Weekend in and weekend out. On one particular evening, he showed up and he saw his supervisor off, who was very happy to get out of there on a Friday night. And he went and did his perimeter checks, checked on the clients, the residents. They were all fast asleep. Things were great. He settled into the office and he began to do the logs for the day, or go over the logs for the day and to start his own log. He started hearing an odd noise, like usual. He describes it as kind of a deep droning noise. And at first, he kind of didn't pay attention to it, and then it grew louder. And so he got his flashlight. He didn't want to turn any of the lights on because he didn't want to disturb any of the residents. And he began to search for the cause of the noise throughout the, facility. This particular group home was an older house. I believe it had a basement with 2 other floors, a front porch. The floors were made of hardwood. It was really nice, but it was a home. It wasn't like a nursing facility or things like that. And I believe there were 10 to 12 residents at the time. So he goes looking for this noise, and he's careful that he doesn't wake anybody up. He's passing through the kitchen. He goes up the stairs to the 2nd floor. He notices that the noise, the volume level stayed the same no matter where he went. He couldn't find what was making the noise because it was kind of coming from everywhere at the same time. And you know how you get closer to something, it gets louder? Well, this wasn't happening until he stepped outside on the porch when he couldn't hear it anymore. It had just completely gone away. When he went back inside the house, he also didn't hear this noise anymore. It was gone. So it was a little odd, but he shook it off, and he went back to the office and began doing his work. A little while later, he starts hearing something that is crawling down the hallway. He hears it. He hears the flesh slapping against the floor of hands and knees. And it also kind of sounds like that squeaky, draggy noise when you're dragging something across leather or plastic. Almost like when it's 400 degrees outside, you're wearing shorts and you go to get out of your car or your truck and you hear that little butt squeak noise if you're wearing shorts. I can't be the only one that happens to, but yeah. Kind of like that. So he hears this coming down the hallway, and it's slow at first, and the closer that it's getting to his office, the faster it's getting, until it sounds like this person is running on all fours, just constant, He gets his flashlight, and he says his heart is beating 400 miles an hour, and he flings open the doors, jumps out in the hall, and there's nothing. There's nothing there. He thinks that he catches a glimpse of something, but he can't be sure. But it scared him so badly that he went back in the office. He calls his supervisor, and he's like, hey, this sounds kind of crazy, but I just want to make sure that you're not in the building, right? Like you went home. And his supervisor's like, yeah, I'm not there. You're there with the residents alone. So he hangs up the phone, and he says that his heart dropped into his ass when he heard that, because he knew that he wasn't alone in this building. And he knew that this was something that it wasn't one of his residents. When you work with people, you get to know them. You know their personalities, you know their routines, especially when you're caring for them. And so he knew that that wasn't the case. So he does his work, and it comes time for him to try to get some sleep. He goes over to his cot, and he says that no sooner that his head hit the pillow, the door creaks open, and he begins to hear the crawling noise again. And this time it's slow and deliberate, and his anxiety is just building and building and building. Now, he did something that I would never do. I don't know what it is. I can't stand it. I can't go to sleep with a closet open, and there's no way in Hades that I'm sleeping, especially if I'm sleeping by myself somewhere, that I'm sleeping with my back facing out towards the outer edge of the bed. that's not happening. I don't do that. He did. So this thing is crawling towards his bed. He's facing a wall. He can't see what's coming up behind him, but it's getting closer and it's getting closer until it stops completely once it gets right up to his bed. He's absolutely terrified by this point, and he hears the cracking and popping of bone. Almost like when you hear people that pop their knuckles or something, or when you bend down and your knees pop, or something like that. It's joints popping back into place and things like that. That's what he's hearing. The little hairs on his arms and his neck began to raise up, and this is what's happening. He feels something reach and touch him on the back of the neck, and then of course he bolts absolutely straight up, looks around, nothing's there. Nothing. But of course he knows he's not insane. There's no way he's sleeping at this point. So he jumps up, he grabs his flashlight, and he goes on the hunt for this thing because he's absolutely positive there's somebody else in the house. He checks the entire house, floor by floor, room by room. I mean, this is an exhaustive search. He's looking in closets. He's looking anywhere a human being could possibly be hiding. He's checked the second floor. He's checked the first floor. The only place that he has left to look is the kitchen. He goes into the kitchen and everything seems to be as it should be until he notices out of the corner of his eye something is coming around the table and it's crawling on the floor. He can't believe what it is that he's seeing, and he gets that moment of confusion, almost, what is this? He begins to back up as this thing begins coming towards him. It was a woman, or it appeared to be a female with dark, tangly hair, and she was half crawling, half dragging herself across the floor. Her skin was an awful gray. She looked like a corpse, and her eyes were absolutely self-illuminated, and they were a bright red. That's what he remembers the best. Of course, as he's trying to back up, he falls on the floor on his butt, and he's just scrambling backwards as she's gunning for him. He gets into the office, still on the floor. He scrabbles backwards, and thank goodness he remembered to hit the latch on the door. It's one of those slidey, type of latches. And it was a French door. And so he sees her in the lowest pain, and she's trying to get in. He said that he sensed this thing, whatever it was evil, and he just knew that it wanted to hurt him. And so as the door is banging, because she's banging, trying to get in, he's sliding on his behind further back into the room. All of a sudden, it's silent. Everything has stopped. She's no longer trying to get into the door, and he kind of breathes a sigh of relief that lasts all of 2 seconds, because that's when her hand shoots out from under the cot behind him, grabs him by the shoulder, and he launches himself from where he's sitting to the other side of the room. He's dropped his flashlight. He's dropped everything. He's basically helpless. He's locked himself in with this thing that's in there now that teleported from under the bed. And she's coming for him. He says that he watched her like in slow motion, and she gets directly up in his face and lets out this screaming type of wail that he can't even describe, but he says that it was like a roar coming from a human being, and the only thing that he could think to do was scream back at her, which he did. When he did that, she was gone. Disappeared, not there anymore, anticlimactic, gone. And of course, he's scared to death and he's praying for morning to get there. All of this took place between like 2 and 3:30 a.m. in the morning. This particular episode where he sees the thing in the kitchen, she's getting in the door. I mean, it was a while. His supervisor or the day shift worker shows up to relieve him in the morning, and of course, Ronnie's got all of these questions, and he tells his supervisor exactly what had happened. And knowing that Ronnie's not the type of person to make things up, he's pretty logical and level-headed. The supervisor says, a long time ago when I first came to work here, I heard stories of there was a woman that worked the night shift. The day shift came in the morning and she was gone. The front door was wide open. The residents were left there to fend for themselves. They were alone. They couldn't find her. They called the police. The police came and they searched the home, and they found the woman in an unused part of the house. And she had been unalived. And it just so happened that the part of the house that they had found her in was now the current office. They had found her body where the cot was. I guess this coworker had never experienced anything for themselves, so they never thought to tell Ronnie about it. Ronnie, knows what's going on now. He says that he doesn't think that he saw the female night shift worker. He thinks that there was something that came out of this tragedy that just wasn't good. It was something that was evil. So Ronnie, he still is a support worker, but he doesn't work the night shift anymore. And but he's happy with his job. He feels fulfilled with his job, and so that's what he likes doing. And he didn't let the paranormal win. It didn't scare him off. He says that he's never experienced anything there since then, and that's a happily ever after for that one. Our next story is kind of freaky. This one also takes place in the early 2000s. This happened to a man that goes by the name of Lee. I have my notes here, you guys. I did write down some notes. Oh, yeah, there we go. And he was a night security guard at a campground. And his shift was from 10 to 6. He was 33 years old at the time. And his job just kind of consisted of making sure that the day visitors were gone. He would patrol the parking lots and kind of make sure everything was as it should be. If the overnight campers needed anything, he was there for that. If there was any trouble, he kind of took care of those situations. So your basic security guard. I do know that he was only armed with a big, heavy, like maglite flashlight. But he worked with one other man, Tim, and Tim was his foreman. There was one particular night, he'd been there for a few months. It wasn't his first night there or anything, and he had just gotten to work. He grabbed his walkie-talkie, and he went to make sure that the day lot down by these wetlands had emptied out and there was nobody there. As he's driving down there, he sees a white car that was still parked in the parking lot. He radios to Tim, his foreman, to let him know that there was a white car there. And Tim informs him that he had busted some frog giggers. They hunt for frogs for various reasons. That were there the previous night, and he had to get rid of them. So he thought maybe that's who these people were in the white car. Usually it was poachers that were out there doing something, or it was like a lover's lane type of situation. It was never anything really, really bad, but they couldn't stay. You had to get them out of there. So that's what he did. As he got closer to the car, the windows were fogged up, so he kind of knew. He could see two people inside the vehicle. There was a female on the driver's side, and there was a male on the passenger side. So he taps on the window, and he's like, okay, lovebirds, it's time to get out of here. You can't stay here, When he does that, the female slams her hand against the driver's side window and kind of startles him, and she looks at him in such an odd way. The car peels out and speeds off. Tim, as he's walking back to his truck, this was Lee. Sorry, you guys, Lee. As Lee's walking back to his truck, he starts hearing this deep, heavy sobbing, like someone's heart is just absolutely broken. He felt a sadness that he'd never felt before, and he began to feel sick. His head had such a pain in it that he kind of dropped to his knees, and he just felt a heavy pressure on him. He really couldn't breathe that well, and after a few minutes, he was still hearing this sobbing. After a few minutes, this kind of lifted, and he didn't really know what it was, but he didn't really think a whole lot more about it. So he walked back to the truck, and he finished his night without a hitch. Nothing else happened, nothing odd. He went home, and he came back to work the next evening. The next evening, he's going down to the daylight to check it out and make sure that it's empty, and he sees the exact same white car there. It's in his headlights. He puts his brights on, and when he does that, the car just vanishes. It just disappears like it was erased. He thought that was odd. He grabs his flashlight, and he goes to investigate because he knows what he just saw. But he can't make heads or tails of it. It's gone. So as he's doing that, he sees this spot on the ground. He said it was a red, thick liquid that was kind of chunky. And that pain came back to his head again, and he hits his knees. He said it was just like immediate, a sharp, stabbing, throbbing, just a pain he'd never experienced in his life, and he couldn't even describe it. It was just excruciating. He sees this on the ground, and he can't figure out what it was. He thinks that it may very well be blood, but then again, it vanishes before his eyes, and the pain in his head is gone. He makes it to his feet, and in the distance, he sees a light over in the forest in the wetlands part. So he has to go investigate. It's his job. And so as he's walking deeper and deeper in the forest, he's just feeling more and more uneasy about things. And he can hear voices. He kind of ducks behind a tree, and he sees two men coming towards him. They're wearing headlamps, and they have nets, and they're carrying coolers. They were froggers. And so, of course, he comes out and he's like, look, you can't be here. That's illegal. He makes them dump their cooler. And as he's asking them questions, they're like, look, we just want to get out of here. Can we just get out of here? And so they're uneasy, but he can't really figure out why. But it wasn't just him busting them. So he's like, yeah, sure. Go ahead and go. I don't want to catch you back down here again. Leave your headlamps on so I can make sure that I'm following you out till you leave, so he can see the light as they're going out of the woods. And they're like, sure, man, whatever. And off they go. Well, he goes to radio into Tim to tell him that he had caught the two froggers and to kind of be on the lookout and make sure they go through the gates. And his walkie-talkie, his radio isn't working. At that moment, he begins to hear this sobbing again. And it's that just mournful, heartbreaking sob. It's coming from behind him, and when he turns around, he sees the woman that he saw in the white car the night before that pressed her hand against the window. Only this time, she's just covered in blood, and her eyes are wide. She's reaching out to him, and he's scared. He knows that she's there, but there's something about her that's otherworldly, and he kind of knew that he wasn't dealing with a living human female. So he backs off. He makes a run for his truck. He gets to his vehicle, and before he can get there, he gets that pain in his head, and he hits his knees. He's kind of glancing up towards his headlights, and he can see her silhouette in the headlights. He knows that she's standing there, and she's reaching out towards him. Of course, she's in a shadow. As she's doing this, he's getting these flashes, like in his mind's eye, and one of which is of this female, and she is laying half in and half out of this white car, where she had been shot in the head with a very large caliber gun, and it had pretty much taken her head off. He blinks his eyes, and the woman's gone, but he knows that he's being watched. She's still there. He shakes it off. He jumps in his vehicle, spins his tires, and he goes back to the office, where he begins to tell Tim what it was that he saw. And he's like, I don't know what's happening. He's really scared there's something wrong with him. Tim starts to tell him, look, man, there's nothing wrong with you. When I first got here, I had the same job that you have. We came across a vehicle that was parked down in the wetland daylot, and it was an awful scene. There had been a woman that had been unalived in that same way. She had been killed with this large caliber firearm, and just like in the last case, it had never been solved. Lee, during the interview, he gets this really sad look on his face, and he tells the interviewer, I think that she just wanted help, and I think that she's probably still there to this day. Now, to his credit, Lee did not quit his job, the same as Ronnie, and he began to go down to the wetlands, and he began to try to make contact with the female to try to help her, and he never did. She never showed herself to him again. He said that he knew that she was there every single time that he went down there. He knew that she was there, and he knew that she was watching him. He said that he would just say, hello, I'm here. Is there anything that you need? And he would wait for a little bit. Nothing would happen. And he would get in his truck, and he would go back to the office. And this happened for as long as he continued to work there, and he never saw her again. So he thinks that she is there to this day, and he thinks that she probably just needs help, or she needs someone to release her. He told the interviewer that he was hopeful that maybe she just needed her story told, and by him sharing this with the world, that maybe that allowed her to move on. It's kind of odd. You never know. You never know. We don't know. We don't know what happens whenever we pass on. One would hope that you just gently went over to that other side. But if you do happen to get stuck here, how is it that you need to be released? Do you have to have someone know your story? Do you need to let someone know what happened to you? Are you trying to make amends for something? I've heard cases like that. So it gives you something to think about. It gives me something to think about anyway. But that'll do it. Those are our cases for this week. And hopefully next week I'll have that big case ready for you guys. And that's it. I definitely appreciate you joining me. I am sorry about the rough video this week. I promise I'll do better. Right now, this is my best. So apologies, and I hope that you understand. I don't know why this camera is doing this in-out thing, so apologies for that too, but it figures. This is definitely a hot mess of a video. But anyway, guys, thank you for joining me. I'm about to go directly to bed, and I will talk to you guys later on. There we go. Talk to you guys later on. I'll definitely see you next week. And do me a favor, hit the like button if you liked it. Please share these videos out if you know somebody that's interested in the same sort of thing. And please hit that subscribe button and join the channel, because I'm always interested in conversations down in the comment box and meeting other people with the same kind of interest. So until next week, stay in the light. Send out nothing but good vibes. Remember to say your prayers, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye, y'all.